So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hector McCarroll, and I will be opening the case for the opposition in the motion that this House supports the right to be forgotten. Now, I'll be honest, I really didn't know much about the right to be forgotten before this debate, but after some intensive and extensive research, including and limited to a skim through of the Wikipedia article on the right to be forgotten, I'm basically an expert. So, just bear that in mind. So essentially, if a person wants information about them which is inadequate, irrelevant, or no longer relevant removed, then they can submit a form to the data provider, generally a search engine provider such as Google, and ask for it to be removed or made less readily available. At least this is the European model, which is what I'll be using as an illustration of why exactly this should not be supported. The first of many problems is the standard. Who should be allowed to have their data removed, and who decides this? Under the European model, you file a claim with the controller of the information. The claim then has to be reviewed by a human because every case is different. Effectively, what this means is that application for the removal of personal information or defamatory statements will go through an unrelated third party before settling between the people who are actually involved. For example, if MJ publishes a terrible review of my speech in which he says that I lie about the amount of research I've done for it, and that I make way too specific examples, and I decide that that's defamation, instead of taking a legal claim against MJ, I can just write to Google and they'll remove it for me. This is essentially giving judicial powers to some nobody who works at Google over just this small area of personal information. Basically, it makes it much easier to remove unwanted or disliked information, regardless as to the truth of that information. I have to come clean with you guys. Hypothetical MJ was right. I wasn't entirely honest about the amount of research I've done for this speech. I got kind of curious, and I read Article 17 of the GDPR, the one about the right to erasure. Let me tell you, it was an absolute delight. I mean, say what you will about the EU, but they sure know how to write a legal provision. It was a real page turner. So in between periods of banging my head on my desk in frustration, I picked up that if a claim fails with search engine provider, then the complainant can file an application to the National Data Protection Service. If the company fails to comply with this service, they can face legal charges. Now here's the thing, just put that to one side for a second. If regulation such as this is not applied everywhere, all across the world, then there's hardly any point in having it at all. There's no point in hiding information in one place while it's readily available in another. If someone, if someone actually wants to see whatever it is you're hiding, all they have to do is use an IP address from the place where it is available. Yes, go on.
Do you not think that most people wouldn't be able to do that, or that it might matter to people locally to be able to control what local people think of them?
That's very true, but again, anyone who's actually interested in this information, anyone like someone who wants to give you a job, or just someone who's interested in you personally, won't find it that difficult to find the information, regardless as to whether or not it's been removed from the search results. So this regulation would have to be applied across the world in order to have any proper effect. And while, sure, in EU countries, data protection services are independent and not affected by the government, we can in no way guarantee that this would be the case in every country, everywhere. The threat of legal sanctions would make it very easy for some governments to obscure undesirable information, which makes this a possible tool for censorship. Well, we agree it's not a tool for censorship in its present form, just in the EU countries, because they're independent, doesn't mean that once it spreads across the world, as it inevitably has to in order for it to be a full right, it could theoretically be used as a tool for censorship. We can't make this right local or it will have no effect, and we can't make it worldwide or it will be used incorrectly. So why should we support it at all? Another thing I picked up on while wading through the provisions of the article, sorry, I'm really exaggerating this, it was like 3 paragraphs long. So anyway, another thing I picked up on was that it was really, really vague. It was like super vague, which really makes it a very weak right. Particularly in the final paragraph, the ultimate, the light at the end of the tunnel, paragraph 3, which basically says that any of the causes for removal of information don't apply if it prevents the rights to, among other things, freedom of expression and information, or for archiving purposes. Now, I can't say I've heard of the right to archive before, but I think I can safely say that if it takes precedent over another right, then that right isn't really super important. In defense of paragraph 3, it does, at least in theory, prevent the right to be forgotten from being abused, or quite possibly from being used at all. I'm not sure I can think of any situation involving the removal of information which could not be defended by claiming it fell into any one of the categories outlined by Article 3. So this provision is necessary for preventing the abuse of the right, but it also weakens the right to the point where it makes it effectively redundant. The whole right was so vague that the EU had to publish an official leaflet defending it. Yes, go on. No, and I sort of I believe I outline this in a moment. If it's so weak, then you run into problems. Sorry, hang on, just trying to remember my point. If it's a weak right, then you have the problems of why is it a right at all? If it's only located in one specific area and it's not around the world, then you're going to have problems with it's too easy to get the information anyway. So this weak right, it won't protect anyone and it won't have any benefits effectively for us. So why should we support it? So I read this official leaflet defending it as well. Yes, sorry, Article 17 really just whetted my appetite for more EU documents. On the plus side, this one was much more enjoyable. They added colour and graphics. It was a solid 7 out of 10, would recommend. One of their big arguments was that this isn't a limit on free speech because the information isn't gone, it's just harder to find. Which really begs the question, like, why? Why is this even here? One of the main defenses of this right was that if you made a mistake in the past, you have made up for it now. And then it shouldn't affect, and if you've made up for it now, it shouldn't affect things like job applications. But an employer isn't just going to say, okay, let me just run a quick background check by typing your name into Google. Oh good, nothing comes up, you're hired. Again, if someone actually wants to know something about you, for example, an employer, it's still fairly easy to find that information, even with this regulation. Essentially, this right can exist as a thin veil over information, which is more of an inconvenience than a block, or we can make it absolute and run the risk of censorship and a loss of freedom of speech. This is not a cause for support. Thank you for listening.
All right, I'd like to thank Hector McCarroll for that fine speech. I'd like to call on Lizzy Younger to continue the case for the proposition.
Mr. Chair, Madam Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society. I love saying that and no one will ever stop me. Just a couple of things on Hector's point that I just noticed, just on your final point there, that it wouldn't stop an employer who wanted to know something about you from finding that out. But if they Googled your name and immediately found this embarrassing information as the first article that came up about you when they typed in your name, they wouldn't necessarily need to know what the information that was they were looking for to find that information, but they would find it anyway. Whereas what you're saying, if they really wanted to find something out, they'd have to know what they were looking for in order to find that. So they'd have to know there was something up. What we're arguing is that people shouldn't be able to just stumble across embarrassing or outdated and irrelevant information about you just by typing in your name. Whereas what you're saying is right, that people would still be able to find it out, but it wouldn't be by chance, and it wouldn't be, like in the Gonzalez case, it wouldn't be every single person that when they Googled his name would find this out, regardless of what they knew about him in the past. But onto the main point of my speech, I've got three main arguments in favour of the right to be forgotten, and that firstly, that the rise of modern technology like the internet has given rise to the problem of revenge porn, and that the right to be forgotten is a feminist issue, and that and we should support it on that basis. The second is that that there is already precedence for the right to be forgotten in certain cases in many common law countries, and that finally that the right to be forgotten doesn't equal censorship, as I'm sure you guys are all going to argue. But on my first point, that revenge porn, for anyone who doesn't know, is the commonly defined as the distribution of sexually explicit images or videos of a person or persons without their consent, often after the breakdown of a relationship, or and often as a way of extorting money and blackmailing the victim or as a way of seeking revenge upon a person for perceived slights. Now, revenge porn has catastrophic effects on the victim's mental health, and the sense of violation and embarrassment that is suffered is often compounded by the other consequences which often occur as a result of these pictures and videos being freely available on the internet. The overwhelming majority of victims of revenge porn are women, and revenge porn has a distinctly misogynistic overtone to it. Whilst there are male victims, the vast majority are women, so I'm going to concentrate on the female victims for now. Yes, Micheal?
Is it not the case that this is already covered by the right to privacy, rather than the right to be forgotten?
Well, yes, but it would be the right to be forgotten would be a general sense that you could remove embarrassing information or outdated, irrelevant information, which I would believe includes this. Privacy would be a separate but related right, but I do see your point there. And it's often compounded by the other effects which follow on from the sharing of these images. Now, Google is the search engine of choice for about 90% of the EU's population, so removing a Google link effectively does make the material invisible for most people. Even if you say that it would still be on the internet, removing a Google link is actually incredibly effective at making sure that people don't see it. It obviously doesn't take it away immediately, and I completely accept that if people want to find this information, they will find it, but they need to know to look, and they need to go to a lot more effort than stumbling across it accidentally. However, whilst this information or material remains accessible to anyone who Googles a woman's name, she's often branded a slut, a homewrecker, or asking for it, and very often she does suffer from misogynistic consequences such as job opportunities, new relationships, college entrance interviews, and basic self-esteem being wrecked, because people will, naturally Google an interviewee's name, see this, and because of our society, they will form an opinion of that woman based on that material. And whilst it obviously raises the point of why society reacts like this to explicit material involving women, the fact is, at least for the moment, society does react like that. And if women at least have the right to remove or request the removal of such material, we can minimise the social and mental consequences that it has on them, whilst working in tandem on strategies to eliminate the social conditions which lead to such misogynistic behaviour in the first place. But on my second point, which is that there is actually already precedence for the right to be forgotten in the sense that in many common law countries, especially in the United Kingdom, convictions for many minor offences are considered spent after a period of time, and meaning that the information regarding said conviction shouldn't be used when someone is looking for employment or insurance or
But in many systems, reputation is already taken into account when giving a judgment or passing a judgment.
Well, yes, reputation would be taken into account when passing the judgment, but if someone's committed a minor crime when they're 18 or 19, I don't feel like their entire reputation for the next 50, 60 years of their life should be affected by that, and rehabilitation post-judgment is certainly possible and something we should strive towards, and which can't be taken into account during the court case itself, because it doesn't exist at that point. But the right to spent convictions is fundamental to the process of rehabilitation, as otherwise many criminals who are convicted of low-level or petty offences, and in reality pose little or no danger to the public, have no incentive to reform, and having been written off by society, the chances of reoffending are much higher. In many cases, the right to know about someone's petty criminal convictions 20, 30 years ago serves no real purpose other than nosiness, and gives people the right to curtain twitch. No thanks, Micheal. And it's far less important than the right for certain things to be forgotten and they have the ability to move on with one's life. Obviously, I wouldn't be arguing this in favour of everything, and there are safeguards as there are. Incredibly violent offences and incredibly serious offences would obviously be an exception, but as a general principle, irrelevant information you should have the right to forget this. And on my third brief point, the right to be forgotten isn't allowing the same as allowing governments the right to decide what can and cannot be read by their citizens. As Eunice pointed out, it is individuals determining what you do with their data. You have no power over anyone else's data, and the government has no power over your data. So you cannot define the same as censorship. It's a completely different thing. But in conclusion, I'd ask you to support the motion that this House supports the right to be forgotten for three simple reasons: that it's a feminist issue and that we should be doing it to protect women from misogynistic hate crimes. Second, that it's fundamental for the process of rehabilitation for all but the most serious of crimes. And thirdly, that it doesn't count as censorship, and censorship is a completely different matter to this. So thank you very much.
I would like to thank Lizzy Younger for their fine speech. I would like to call on Micheal Hoffman to continue the case for the opposition.
Good evening. So today we're debating the right to be forgotten, but I really feel that this debate should be called the right to manipulate your access to data by those in power. And I hope to elucidate what I mean by that point. I hope to make 3 points to illustrate why the right to be forgotten is not a universally positive idea to accept as a global rule in all instances, and how this idea could be stipulated in order for it to work and actually enact the positive change I think it was meant to. So the right to be forgotten, as it's quoted from the EU, as we talked about tonight, the right to erasure, is the right for your data to be unlinked from your name when you search it on something such as Google, and your data to be erased when you log off from a website. It demands that companies, quote, erase an individual's personal data, cease further dissemination of the data, and potentially have third parties halt processing of that said data. So when I started to read about this erasure, and I kind of thought about more erasure from history, it made me think of the Stalinist era that I'd been reading about in my history course here. Although the technology was different, Stalin was able to attempt to rewrite history by erasing those he wanted forgotten. For example, in the famous photograph of Nikolai Yevtsov, Stalin's head of the secret police, the man was skillfully erased from standing shoulder to shoulder with Stalin in this photograph. And in this way, Stalin was able to try to rewrite the facts, erasing those he wanted from history. Now, extrapolating that, if this were to become a global phenomenon accepted as policy in authoritarian and dictatorial regimes, the power to rewrite history would be the hands of those in power. People wouldn't just be erasing photographs anymore, people in power would be erasing access to all of their information on the internet and editing what we see. When you search Google in a country led by a dictatorial regime and wanted to learn about corruption or the allegations against someone in government, all links to articles pertaining to this information would be gone or erased by that government. This would even extend to, no thank you, this would even extend to information about things outside of your borders, and this would be...
On that point?
Sure.
That's exactly why we're saying that this should be an individual's right written into the Constitution rather than a right that the state has.
And I'm getting to that. So all this would be accomplished without you even knowing it, and this would be a violation of free speech and freedom of information. Thomas Hughes, who's the executive director of Article 19, or Freedom of Information nonprofit, once said, this case could see the case we talked about with Gonzalez, the right to be forgotten, threatening global free speech. Because if European data regulators they shouldn't be allowed to decide what internet users around the world find when they use a search engine. And I think this point is really critical, that the court must limit the scope of the right to be forgotten in order to protect the right of internet users around the world to access information online. Now today, actually, this happened to me like an hour ago that I thought I should bring to the debate. As most of us do, I walked into Debenhams to look at the makeup counter, and I had a chat with the makeup artist who was there. And I said that what was I looking for? I was like, oh, I wanted a new lipstick because I'm going to be speaking at this debate. And I said what it was about, and she said, oh, GDPR, I know about that. And I said, oh, really? Tell me more. She said, well, I could give you a long list of how this law is really affecting the middle-class service workers of Ireland. She said, now I work as a makeup artist at this makeup counter, and we had VIP lists or email addresses of people that bought foundation or eyeshadow. Now with this law, all of those lists had to be abolished, and the customers can't be contacted. Now at this time, the sales of all of these makeup counters at all of the major retail stores in Dublin are down 20% in sales because they can't contact their customers anymore because they can't have that information. They also had a system of CRM at, say, the Estee Lauder counter with iPads where you could put in your information. Now that's illegal, and the team that managed that has all been laid off. Also, they have a hard time filling stocks because of this decree. If you make a mistake through human error on putting in someone's information, you could lose your job and have to pay up to a 100,000 euro fine for pressing the wrong button. So I think from this we can see that this law is not affecting the people that it really needs to, but it's hurting actual workers here in Dublin, people that are trying to make a living in the middle class, Ireland and other EU countries. So I think that's a problem, that it's too vague, it needs to be more concise, and we need to make sure it's not hurting the people that are just trying to make a living every day. So I walked out wearing a lot more makeup than I meant to when I went in, but I definitely learned there are real-world ramifications for this decree, even here in Ireland. So after this, I was thinking about, I think that access to information on the internet should be free and unedited. Information shouldn't be erased in any case, and we should be able to read what journalists have sometimes given their lives to report upon, and governments should be held for past actions that we should be able to find on the internet. But I think more importantly, for just normal people that are working every day, this law needs to be more concise and really stipulate what's needed, or else it's so vague that the people that just normal people are getting affected by this law that shouldn't be. So I think that the burden of this law should really be on the search engines such as Google and other search engines such as that.
On that point.
No, thank you. I think today it's unfortunate that we have to bear the burden of protecting ourselves from identity theft and the misuse of our data. But however, regulations should be put in place that companies, the real problem here is that companies shouldn't be using big data in order to sell it for advertisements or be able to use it in order for profit. I don't think the real problem is companies having your email in order to send you promotions about what kind of eyeshadow is on sale at the makeup counter that you like to go to. So therefore, I think the policy needs to be reshaped because it does really have value that we should have our data being protected, but it's targeting the wrong people. It's not targeting the big companies that are using our data in order to sell to advertisers and using that data in order to make more profit, editing what we see online. That's what really needs to be, that's the essence of this argument, that those companies need to be regulated. It shouldn't affect middle-class workers who are just trying to get by every day. So please, I ask you, oppose this motion. Thank you.
What's up, everyone? Thanks for having me here at lovely house debate.
As this is your first debate in the chamber, you're entitled to make concerns. If you choose to accept them, this means that no one from the floor will offer you opinion information. However, if you waive them, then we'll all clap and be very excited.
I'd like to wave them. Applause me. Okay, are we going? I start? Great. Okay. So Caoimhin has claimed that none of us are given a reason why censorship is bad. I'm going to give one very simple reason that anyone else's right to privacy supersedes my. No, sorry, wrong way. Anyway, my right. Your right to privacy does not trump my right to know if there are maniacs like this running the government or working for my company or in my social life or like anything else. That's the only argument I'm really going to make. Look, the world we live in is becoming increasingly radical and for many increasingly dangerous. There are strong forces attempting to drive racism and hatred of others back into the mainstream. Hate crimes, year after year, are increasing. Politicians, with ever more extreme rhetoric, are being elected. More and more people are living in fear of violence being inflicted upon them, either by the state or by their fellow citizens. Look, and it is my firm belief that this wave of hate will come to pass. This is going to end. It's inevitable. Both social liberalism and multiculturalism are the inevitable trajectories of history. No regime on earth, no matter how oppressive, no matter how dogmatic, has ever been able to stop that. So, no, you will not stop it, Caoimhin. I'll fucking launch an insurrection against you, I swear to God. So, this is going to come to pass, and when it does, there's a whole lot of people who are going to want us to forget that they were among its cheerleaders. But this isn't the old days. You can't just like hang up your white robes or your orange sashes or whatever. This is the digital age, and we have receipts. We have receipts on everyone who supported this on everything everyone has ever done. Everyone who supported reactionary oppressive forces, everyone who's marched with tiki torches or shared fucking reactionary meat on the internet. This stuff is with you for life. I do not support the right to be forgotten because I do not believe these people deserve a chance to wipe the slate clean. This is the core. Thank you very much. This is the core of my argument. If you are black or Jewish, you have a right to know if the plumber you are hiring is a white supremacist. If I'm trans, I have a right to know if the boss at my new job, is going to harass me because he's offended by which bathroom I've chosen to use. Anytime someone gets a new job, or gets into a new relationship, or hires a new employee, they have the right to know what the people they're associating with really think of them. Yeah, I was actually just going to raise one of your points. Yes.
Great. I just think, would you not say that the courts couldn't distinguish between a racist and a victim, and that the victim has a right, perhaps, to not publicise information which might make them a victim?
Victim. Oh, okay. So you want to, but the one doesn't necessarily mean you have to selectively apply the right to privacy, and these things can get very murky. And actually, this brings me right into my next point. Although first, I'd like to actually briefly talk about revenge porn. So I believe the best way to deal with revenge porn is first of all place laws specifically against this, and secondly, increasing the social costs of sharing private pictures of your ex. What we need is a world where the social consequences of sharing revenge porn are much harsher than the social consequences of being a victim. Furthermore, I think I should point out that the right to be forgotten would necessarily mean that people who share revenge porn would be able to request that the information of them sharing this is permanently deleted. I'd rather like a world where there are public accessible online databases where women could tell other women which men are abusive, which men are going to share pictures of you, which men you should avoid. Yes.
That's not necessarily mutually exclusive from the point. There would be that's a great idea to have public databases of that, but that's you still have the problem of awful images of women being shared and misogynistic hate crimes if you can't remove that. So what you're saying is not mutually exclusive there.
You do, and what do? Yeah. Yes, you think that those are mutually exclusive. I don't think they are because, as I said, the right to be forgotten would necessarily make these databases impossible to compile because all the information will be wiped and the evidence of who shared it will be wiped so that we wouldn't be able to compile who shared in the first place because they also have a right to be forgotten and have a right to request that the information of them sharing be removed. Hold on a minute. Yes, so I'd like to actually put some caveats on this. I'm not advocating for any kind of liberal Gestapo or anything like that, and I'm actually very critical of certain aspects of court and cancel culture. I believe people are capable of making mistakes and growing up and getting out of all views. I used to have plenty of incredibly stupid, shitty views about lots of things, and I'm sure basically every single person in this room did. At some point, oh, there we go. At some point, having mildly embarrassing things like you pop up is just going to get so common, excluding someone from a job or public life because of it is just going to become impossible. But if that future is going to work, we need to accept that we're going to need to accept that people can make mistakes, and they can make slip-ups, and they can grow and learn as a person. In closing, by supporting the right to be forgotten, you are supporting anonymity for the very worst people. I do not want this. I want the world to know forever who supported what at this moment in time, and I want those things to hang over them for the rest of their lives, or at least until they're willing to rejoin the fold, and recant on the views. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Jacob Wolf for the fine speech, and I would like to call on Ben Whyte to the case.
Oh boy. Right then. Oh, sorry, could you pass me that paper there? I have a pun there that's meant to be very funny. Yes, thank you very much. All the red writing on it. The blood of Caoimhin's enemies, of course. Now, 1 second. I mean, I did get the pen off Caoimhin, so it could very well actually be that. Anyway, right. Before the drunken love child of Stephen Bannon and Machiavelli was stood up and proposed the Fourth Reich on steroids, I feel we had a very good frame to the debate. Right? So, we're just going to pretend he didn't exist. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm of course here to support the right to be forgotten. Partly because it's necessary to advance human rights. Partly because half the time I'm out of it, I don't remember what I do. So why the hell should you? Now, in all seriousness, privacy is important. It's a basic human need, and the right to be forgotten is the subsidiary of that. We all need quiet. We all need peace. And some of us, like Wayne Rooney, need the privacy to listen to Hoovers for 20 minutes before we sleep. You may ask me, why was that relevant? I don't know. I just thought you should all know that. It's something that underlies our battles against overreaching governments which harvest our information, which, of course, the opposition have raised an awful lot. We're living in the age of Snowden, the age of NSA operatives who listen to us as we scream yeet down the phone to our best friend at 2 a.m. in the morning. And importantly, in an age where a company can view what stupid idiotic views I had about capitalism at 14 on Facebook, I decided not to hire me. In this age, we've been forced to ask ourselves, what truly is a right? Do rights even exist? Can they exist? What did I have for breakfast this morning? In an age where one mistake on the internet can ruin a man, or make a Kardashian, what exactly is that right? And in this spiel, I intend to show how it can and why it matters that it is a right. I have 2 points, the youth and the nature of rights. My first point concerns that wonderful, peaceful internet that we all know for its nuanced political commentary and centrist political user base. The internet is basically the reason we have this debate. Prior to the internet the advent of global interconnectivity, it was easy enough to be forgotten. One could simply move, change your name, and never be heard from again. The right to be forgotten was an implied right, rather than one that was actively enforced. But those were simpler times. Now the internet has meant that everyone you meet has an opportunity to discover something about you, whether it be your Facebook profile for 10 years back that you regret so much, or even your Tumblr page from when you thought Green Day was Mozart on steroids. I like to say that stuff on steroids a lot, and that it wasn't a phase mob. That Tumblr, remember that emo one? Yeah, you're going to regret that one. People have access to a lot of your information, which can be embarrassing and degrading. Lord knows I have so much from my past which I would beg to be forgotten. My Take Me Out video from 2 years back, and basically any picture of me before I finally punched puberty back. Well, that's arguable as well, but whatever. The internet makes people a lot harder to forget. There's always some new drama, some new insult thrown at a person. And unlike before, where home was a sanctuary for most, assholes somehow fit into your phone and assault people from there too. People from years before can follow you into new jobs, new places, and stalk you on a whole new level. The actions of you as a 12-year-old can come to far more of an influence on your life when you're 16 than they should have in the past. Pictures of people doing stupid things circle around, and the effect is just ruthless. Basically, because everyone is always tuned in, nothing is ever forgotten. Slip-ups, I nearly said shit-ups, have become common life-defining things in a manner they would never have been before. And rumours have become substitutes for facts. That's the crux to say why at least young adults should have the right to be forgotten. Because we're not who we are as kids. I don't recognise the person I was when I was 13, and thank fuck for that. We develop hugely as persons on that brief grasp of youth that we have. We make mistakes, we face consequences, and we get grounded, for example. What we don't deserve is to be constantly reminded of the fact that we got grounded by an array of peers that can instantly upload video evidence of that mistake that you once made, that you ended up sleeping on a tarp in the middle of Skerries on someone's boat and then fishing with them for 4 hours. True story, it was very strange. Don't remember much of the night. It's unfair, unrepresentative, and a form of bullying. Individuals need to be able to move on with their lives, or else you've essentially imprisoned them to their previous experiences, which may or may not have any representation of them now. You ruin them simply with the memory, and that's just a bit more than effed up. On to my second point. What in God's names are rights? Well, put simply, without any religious connotations or philosophical debate, rights are simply the ground rules to life which we all agree are necessary to have without society crumbling into a chaotic, unjust shithole, or as Caoimhin would like to call it, his ideal government. They're ordained by the people. This debate isn't whether the right to be forgotten is somehow some right we have always had, and that we've suddenly come to the realisation, as some in Irish constitutional law would argue is the case, but rather a new issue that society has to ask itself because of the movement of technology and social realities. So the question comes to it, does everyone deserve the right to be forgotten? And frankly, I'm with the opposition on this matter. No, they fucking do not. Hitler, Stalin, and serial killers who you've all thrown at us like Fred West should not be forgotten. However, we should make exceptions to the rule. However, should we make that the general fact? The answer is no. How do we reconcile this fact? Well, actually, it's very handy that Irish law is so wonderfully contradictory, because they've actually created a system for this. It's an idea that's fairly unique to Irish and British law, and it's the idea that rights are subject to certain limits, based on how much of a cunt you are to other people. Shout out to my constitutional law seminar teacher was here, and I had it written in the speech to say to him, but he asked before I could say it. So sad. So for example, in Ireland, you have a right to silence, but depending on how you use that right, you might end up breaking the law anyways, because it's not always in the interest of the majority that you have that right. For example, when you've scammed the country out of billions and made a tidy wee profit for yourself before fucking off to America, if anyone can remember that era, the average adult should be able to have the basic right and sometimes to escape one's persecution. Abuse and sometimes criminal targeting that threatens one's life is the reason why we should have this right to be forgotten. We've already got constitutional mechanisms to deal with the nuances that the opposition have so eagerly put forward. And it has been established that rights don't have to be absolute, merely strictly adhered to. Rights are more what we as a society value, and everything that has a set value, even rights. One could quote philosophers such as Voltaire about the sacredness of rights, and how if they're written into a constitution, they have to be absolute. My simple argument to that is that it's simply not feasible in all situations to do that. When you follow rights to the absolute, such as the Second Amendment in America, or the recently removed Age Amendment, then you generally get very restrictive and very hard, you get a very restrictive and very hard to regulate system, which is unsuited to act on genuine issues. To counteract this, it is necessary to treat rights like a malleable material to an extent, rather than a rigid structure. Because even rights made of steel will rust. And it's easier to see a right bent than it is broken under the realities of life. Simply put, rights are complicated social structures, more complicated than I can ever explain, because I'm not a smart man. And they have more societal support rather than the fact that they're written down somewhere on paper. In order for more complicated rights to have support, like the right to silence, they've got to have limits. Or else people are forced to pick between a black and white option in a rather grayscale world. And with that, I'll close my speech.
I would thank Ben Whyte for the fine speech, and I would like to call on Micheal Ganley to contribute his opposition.
So when I actually first read this motion, I wasn't sure what side it would be on. Like, there is a lot, I think, that we would all like to forget. Maybe not you, Caoimhin. But, I'd like to forget the entire Burkean journal. Like, that entire phase of my life, I would like to be gone. But nonetheless, to move on to, I think, my speech, I'm going to break it up into two parts. So first is rebuttal, and we have a lot. Then I'm going to go on and put forward some of my own views. So firstly, I'd like to point out that virtually everyone, again, bar Caoimhin, on the prop bench has made the mistake of confusing privacy with right to be forgotten. They are two separate things. You can have a right to privacy and do not have a right to be forgotten. The Irish courts since McGee have, when they were in that whole unenumerated rights phase, and the American courts when they were in that whole substantive due process phase, I'm not a big fan. But nonetheless, we have a right to privacy. And we can have that without necessarily granting a separate right to be forgotten. Furthermore, we also have a right to a good name. So if someone says something that's a lie about you, you can sue them under defamation law. You don't need, again, a right to be forgotten to stop people from lying about you. Now, to move on to some rebuttal. Eunice, you said that this isn't a memory wipe. You're actually wrong on that. It is a memory wipe, because I think there's two different forms of memory. So there's a form of memory, obviously, which we all know, which is our own, but there's also societal memory. And Alistair MacIntyre makes this point quite well in his book, After Virtue, which is societies generally have their own memories and stories, because people are narrative animals. We like to have these stories, these mythologies, which link us to our past. When you wipe something from the internet, you're wiping it from societal memory. So it is a memory wipe. There are also absolute rights, Eunice, like the right to bodily integrity and the right to life, are both fairly absolute. Debatably, okay, you're shaking your head, but in 1 second again. I'll come back to you right in a second. Again, you also do, under the right to privacy, like, I agree. If someone, for example, as you mentioned, revenge porn, if someone's filming you without your consent, yes, it's a violation of the right to privacy. They shouldn't have the right to do it. You don't need to have a separate right to be forgotten to enforce that. You can already cover that. Yeah, go ahead, take it.
Surely the fact that it was filmed and stuff, surely the news article about it would still be there, and they want that delisted, even though the video is gone.
But again, it's already a violation of the right to privacy, so it can already be removed. You don't need a separate right. And there is an issue, and you raised this in your POI, Tigran. It was a good point. But why not have this right? Isn't some right better than none? Actually, it is. And the reason for this is, well, Thomas Aquinas puts it out quite well, which is actually, when you create too many laws, you create disrespect for the law. Similarly with rights, I think the same thing can apply. When we just propagate, and again, Alistair MacIntyre mentions this, I feel like I'm quoting him a lot. He's not right on everything, but he gets some things right. But when you create too many rights, particularly when they're already covered by others, you actually create disrespect for those rights. It's not to the benefit of society. And again, this is actually a totalitarian action. And I know there's been such a trend. Even correctly pointed out, it is totalitarian. Because it's a way for the powerful and those who've actually done harmful things to society to cover up their tracks. For example, there's already been, so just as a little bit of trivia, News Talk actually reported that one of the first people to make a GDPR request in Ireland was Jerry the Monk Hutch. Okay, so like, not a good guy. So, and by the way, like, he's been found guilty of, I don't even know has he been found guilty of a crime. I think he has been found guilty of some, but not to the full extent of what he's done. So the fact is that some of that stuff hasn't been verifiably found to be true. And nonetheless, this is a way, when you grant Jerry the Monk Hutch the right to be forgotten, you actually tie the hands of the media. On that point. Now, yes.
Well, that's exactly the point that we were making earlier about the balance of proportions in rights, which is actually